So yeah, good turnout. Thanks for coming along. What I wanted to do today was talk to you about the Cyber Resilience Act and try not to make it as dry as it sounds. It's important that people start to understand what this is about and how important it is. In a few years' time, about 3 years' time, everybody's going to have to comply to the standard if you want to sell a product in the European Union. So it's very, very important. And I'm not going to go into too much detail of legislation, but try to give you just an understanding of where it came from and what you need to do to comply with it. So, a little bit about me. So my name is Chris. I'm working for Crypto Quantique. We're at the front there at box 87. Come along and have a chat with us. We're based in London. We've been around since 2016. And what we're trying to do is simplify customers' tasks of connecting an IoT device to a cloud service like AWS or Azure. For a small embedded device, it's quite complex. So we're trying to help people in doing that, make it easy. And we also do that with Linux type units as well, like industrial computers and things like that. So it's basically end-to-end security of an IT product. And that's us, Crypto Quantique. So as I say, come around and talk to us at some point today. You may have seen a lot of these slides, scaremongering slides as to who's been hacked, how much it's going to cost. I'm sure this goes up every day, but it's important that to understand that it is a problem. Parts that are connected to the network are going to have to be secure. That's why this legislation is coming along, and you need to make sure that your products have security requirements. So this is just to give you a bit of idea of what the legislation is like right now. So it all stems from quite a few years ago in the distant past. There's a foundation called the IoT Security Foundation. You can go to their .org website. And they were trying to start making people aware of designing security into their products. And they came out quite a few years ago now with the 13 best practices. It was a really good book. It was in collaboration with the UK government. And it was a small pamphlet, kind of easy Sunday reading down the pub. It wasn't heavily technical. And it just gave you an idea of what you should look at with regards to putting security into your connected device. It talked a little bit about encryption, passwords, not having backdoors in your production device, which is a classic. Making sure all test points are removed in production, all kind of things you think, well, yeah, it's kind of obvious, but it was written down. It was very good. That grew into an EU standard, an ETSI standard. They turned the 13 best practices into 150, but that's what Europe does, right? And that was more extensive, but pretty good, actually. And again, not a bad read, gave you some more details of what you should be looking at. Then they did some analysis of the best practices and found out what was the worst one, what was the one that was really getting hacked most of the time. And what came out was default passwords, right? The old admin password on your product you buy from PC World. So they attacked that, and that's what the first legislation came in California a couple of years ago, where you couldn't sell a product in California that didn't have that had a default password. So that was the start of it. And there's other legislations come out, and of course there's PSTI for the UK, which is a similar kind of thing. But now it's starting after COVID with all these connected products and people being connected. It's starting to get serious. So these were always best practices and advice, but now it's legislation. It's coming, and it's coming hard. So these are just some of the other legislations that are around. So the Cyber Resilience Act, it's expected to be approved by the council later this year. And then you do get it's about a 3-year period of time to get your products ready and sell them in the market. So you get plenty of time. So quick summary. So it includes hardware and software elements. So it's not just connected hardware like your kettle or your washing machine. It's also software as well. Spreadsheet stuff, databases, things like that. Anything that you might be processing something that needs to be secured. Now it's an obligation for manufacturers. So that end manufacturer is going to put a product in the market. It's their responsibility to be CRA compliant. So distributors and importers, if they're selling it, then they need to be make sure it's compliant. It has to last over the life cycle of your product. They state 5 years, so that's kind of about a commercial product lifespan. So you have to have CRA compliance for 5 years of your product. But the really scary bit is the actual documentation, once it's been decommissioned, has to be kept up to date for 10 years. So it's quite serious. There's lots of harmonization of standards to follow because there are a lot of standards out there and they're trying to pull those all together and group them in the CRA. There's a lot of overlapping as well. So they're trying to figure that out and get that sorted out. Conformity assessment. So this actually came out of the ITSF stuff early on. One of the things you've got to do is sit down in a room, a darkened room with some engineers, and figure out what are the actual risks that your product could be hacked. Just think about it. Just, how could it be broken? Could somebody get in a back door? Is there any test points exposed? All sorts of things. Just flesh them out and write them down. And you have to do that with CRA. You have to write it down and document that you've done that. They're going to survey the market. They're going to have people looking out for these products. So, you won't be able to get away with it, and it will be enforced. And they're going to be pretty stringent on the enforcement. I got some figures later on. And the interesting one is it's also going to affect your CE mark. So you may not get a CE mark if you're not CRA compliant, which is pretty serious. So yeah, it's quite heavy stuff. So the scope, these are just some statements out of there that give you some idea of whether your product will fit. So you've got hardware products, components, placed on the market, laptops, smartphones, that kind of thing that you'd expect. And then software components, interestingly, like operating systems and games and mobile apps and things like that. So this is to give you some idea of who should actually be sensitive to complying with CRA. So it's the person that's going to put the product on the market to sell to the public or manufacturing, other companies. So here I've got an example of a CCD camera. So obviously you've got lots of components in it, microcontrollers, processors. You may need some memory devices, and then you've got applications that may talk to that camera so you can view it. So it's the person that's doing the camera that has to make sure that they're CRA compliant. So this is a life cycle of your product that you want to put into the market that has to be CRA compliant. So over there in design and development, as I mentioned earlier, you do need to sit down and assess the risks. Just classify are you holding some private information? Do you need to hold it? Is it going to be there at rest? Is it going to be in your flash memory? You need to talk about all the different bits of data you're going to manage and what are the risks of it being exposed. So you do that assessment and you have to document it. The product related requirements, what are the requirements of the device, and then how you're going to handle the vulnerability part of it. So one of the first things, again, the ITSF pushed for was you have a website for your product called a vulnerability exposure website where anybody can go in and say, my device has been cracked, or typically a white hacker will go in, he'll break your product, and then he'll send you a vulnerability statement saying, I've hacked your product. What are you going to do about it? You can maybe pay me and I'll tell you about it or whatever. But the important thing is that somebody must be able to tell you if they found a crack in your product. And typically it's via some kind of website. And so you need to have that set up, and then you need to have a process to manage it. So what do you do when you get the emails coming in? We've got them at CQ, but mainly it's people who found cracks in our website, which is handled by somebody else, and they're usually just a minor thing. But you have to deal with them. Technical files, information instructions for use. So you need to explain to the end customer how to use the device and maybe talk a little bit about the security enhancements in the device. So then near the end of the design development, you want to make sure you're conforming. So you assess your product. Depending on what category you fit in, you can do the assessment yourself and file a report. Or if you're in some of the higher critical categories, you can have a third-party company assess you. So come in and tell you whether you're doing it right or not. But you need to do that. And then, of course, it needs to, if you want to do a CE mark, then it's going to have to conform to that. Your product goes out into the market. So then you have to continuously monitor that it's compliant. Make sure that nobody's broken into it, that vulnerabilities have been found. So you need to constantly monitor that over its product lifecycle. You have to do a lot of reports, and this is the real time sump for this standard, I think, is the amount of documentation that you're going to have to keep up to date for a long time. I mean, it says 5 years, but it's 10 if you end the life of the product. So you have to report on vulnerabilities that have been exploited. You have to tell all the right people, certainly the customers, and you have to provide capabilities to remove the vulnerability. And then explain how incidents that you found have affected the product and how it could affect your customers. How serious was the vulnerability? So a lot of documentation. Sorry to keep going on about it. So what does it cover? So it's product-led coverage. So the level at which you should be CRA compliant is dependent on the level of security that your product, which category it fits in. So I'll get to that in a minute, a bit more detail. You have to make sure that your product is delivered without a known vulnerability. That may sound obvious, but there are quite a few people or products that have gone out where they've kind of known that something was a bit dodgy. We'll fix it later. That's a really serious issue if you'll get caught doing that. You need to make sure you have a list of all the known vulnerabilities and you know that they've been fixed before the product goes out into the market. Based on risk. So some of the categories, security by default. This is where your product, when it goes out into the market, so somebody buys it from PC World, takes it home, switches it on, the security must be running in that product by default. So even if you hardware reset it, it should come back up again and go into that security mode. It's got to be by default. So this default password that's a common one, if you hardware reset that, passwords that you may have set up needs to have been cleared, and it starts again from a security mode. You can't have any sort of bypass when you've got a new product where you can disable the security. It must be by default. You must be able to securely update the product. That's a bit of a killer. So it's got to be connected to to the internet, of course, and you must have the capability to update the software over the air, which is quite a complex task to do. But it's important that when a vulnerability is found, you can patch it very quickly and inform everybody what you've done, what the patch does, and how the customer should implement it. Confidentiality and integrity of data, that's basically making sure that any information that you're passing between your product is encrypted, and it's also integrity checked to make sure nobody's modified it. Limit your attack surfaces. So my favorite is you leave a UART port exposed on the pins just as a backdoor, things like that. If you can encase something in epoxy, like they do with HSMs, put a mesh grid over it. I mean, that's going over the top, but there are ways you can actually limit the attack surfaces. Again, that's about chatting with the engineers about what you're going to put in the final product. Reduce the impact of an incident. As soon as you hear an incident, get on top of it. Make sure everybody knows. Don't try and be secretive about if you've had your security broken. Try to get it fixed as soon as you can. And then record and monitor security relevant events. So these are all the things that you need to make sure you've got. So vulnerability handling. Identify and document the dependencies and vulnerabilities, including the SBOM. So you need a software bill of materials. You need to manage that and make sure all the software that's in your product is in a bill of materials. You know all the version numbers, and you know that if it's third-party software, you understand that they've done patches and that you can patch it through your update process. So again, document all the dependencies. As I said, no known vulnerabilities and address vulnerabilities without delay. I can't recall whether there's actually time limits on it, but they're pretty stringent about you need to get the information out there fast. Test the security of the digital product, kind of obvious. Publicly disclose information of when you've fixed a vulnerability, so make sure everybody's aware. I mean, you may think, well, is that a really good idea? That's, my product's been hacked. But if you show that, you're on top of it and it's been fixed, then you could reduce the spread of that attack or what it could cause. So always be open with your security. In that, these are the security algorithms I'm using. This is the hardware I'm using. This is the software I'm using, and there is a vulnerability here, and this is the patch. Just let everybody know. It's part of the CRA. Facilitate sharing information between your channel partners, distributors, etc. Make sure they're up to date with everything so they're informed. Maybe their customers start moaning at them. And then mechanisms to allow secure updating. So that's where you need these Wi-Fi updates or some type of update mechanism, or even a customer can update them themselves. Make sure you can do that. And that they're delivered without delay. So what do we cover? So they have these different categories. Most of you will be in the default category. About 90%, I think, of products are going to be in the default category. So this is where you will mainly self-assess your product. So you'll be doing the documentation and the work to make sure that it's compliant. You don't necessarily have to bring anybody in. You can do it yourself. And there is a lot of help with this Resilience Act. It's one thing the European Union is very good at. There's a lot of documentation and help explaining how you should do things. So this covers things like, photo editing I've got here, word processing, hard drives, games, things like that. Nothing too critical. Then you get into these critical classes where you need to start applying other standards to your product that may be covered underneath the CRA umbrella, because there's lots of standards. But as long as you can apply to a standard, or if not, you can get somebody to come in and check that your product is compliant. If you're a class 1. This is where you like password managers in the case of software, network interfaces, so where you're handling customers' data, firewalls, and absolutely microcontrollers. So if you've got a microcontroller in your product, you might be under this area. Class 2, it sort of goes up. You can see in severity, so operating systems, firewalls, secure elements, that's a very secure area. And then this is your critical stuff, where like a hardware security module, a proper security piece of hardware or software, it has to be certified and done by third party. So the areas, criteria, critical infrastructure, so a city's national grid or whatever controlled has to be under these, the highly critical stuff. And these classes, the criteria, functionality, is it critical software? Industrial control obviously is very important, so you'd be under here. And it depends on the extent of the impact. But most people will probably be in the default category. So I just gave some other lists of examples here. So especially I mentioned microcontrollers or processors. So if they've got security-related hardware in them, and most of the new, over the last few years now, microcontrollers that have come out have got a lot of security hardware in them now. In the old days, it just used to be an AES accelerator, but now you've got proper secure boot mechanisms, key generation hardware, multiple key generation algorithms, etc. So they're very sophisticated. And if you've got a microcontroller that has that in it, then you will need to go under probably a critical class and make sure that you are using the secure boot mechanism, which you will need if you're going to do over-the-air updates anyway. So same with FPGAs and ASICs. So this is for any smart home product where you've got security-related functionalities inside, door locks and cameras. These are going to be under this class 1 critical. Public key infrastructure and digital certificate issuance software, that's kind of where our area is. That in the software domain, you're going to be in critical. Critical 2, so these are tamper resistant. So if you've actually got a micro that's used in a HSM, I guess, hardware security module, typically they've got a wire mesh over them and they're epoxied. So if you try to physically access it, it will notify the micro and it'll go through a set of erasing memory and destroying itself, whatever. A bit like Mission Impossible. So tamper-resistant microcontrollers, if you're having to use that in your product, then yeah, you're a critical class 2. And then all these other software, firewalls and intrusion detection software. And then the scary stuff then is going to be your smart meters and your utility meters, smart cards, obviously. These are all going to be under the highly critical stuff. So I don't know how many of you guys will be in that area, but hopefully most of you are going to be in the default category. Penalties for non-compliance. Ouch. So they can require you to bring your non-compliance product to an end to eliminate risk. They can restrict the making available of a product or order that product to be withdrawn or recalled. And then, yes, there are 6 noughts here. They get pretty serious if they want to. They start looking at your turnover and making sure it does really hurt. Whoops. So timeline, when do you need to start thinking about this seriously? So this is some of the important points it's gone through. The important one is this year it's going to be adopted by the council. So that means, yes, it's going to be accepted. We're going to run with this. And then about, can't remember how long it is now. It's gone out of the top of my head, but it becomes entry into force. So that's when it's actually the start date. This is now when it's serious. But you do have, they're going to give you 3 years grace before they actually will start coming after you. So in force, probably, as it says there, next year, that's when you need to start designing your product. And then about 2027, they will start watching you guys and the fines will start coming out. So that's kind of a rough timer. So there is a little bit of time, but because it's so intense and complex and a lot of documentation, you really do need to start thinking about it now. So I wanted to give you just now an overview of what a typical product, a connected product, goes through. So this is just kind of give you a map of where your product may fit and the different standards and maybe where we at Crypto Quantique can help you. So there's all these different applications, sort of automotive and smart meters, etc. And these are some of the other standards that you may want to comply with. You know, when I said you could do a self-assessment or an application dependent, then you may need to comply with, say, 62443, which is quite a heavy one. That's quite a good one. If you comply with that, you should easily get to CRA. But some of these other ones, these are the type of applications. They typically, if they're connected to the internet, you need to have some kind of registry mechanism because each one has to have a unique identity. And that unique identity is typically used when communicating with a server. And that server typically would have to have a public key infrastructure mechanism on it so that it could issue certificates, renew certificates, and manage the lifecycle certification of that product. Again, that's where we could help you. In the device itself, you'll have some kind of product. It'll typically have a root of trust in it, a TPM, which is most of your laptops have, or it may have a secure element in there, and that's where your root of trust is. So that would be where the unique identity would come from. And that will be registered with the server. And then as you go through manufacturing, it'll go into the market. Somebody would buy your fridge with your product inside, takes it home, switches it on. It would then connect to that server. It would be authenticated because they knew what the identity was, and you'd be connected to the PKI. So now that product could be managed securely throughout its life cycle. So you could do validation, control, secure booting of the product, Wi-Fi updates, and all that kind of additional control would go throughout the life cycle. And then when you retired it, typically you destroy the keys and revoke all the certificates. And that's something, again, which would be part of the platform that you'd be using to manage your product over its life cycle. So if you want to talk about this in a bit more detail, then come and see us. We can help you with this kind of deployment. A bit of a sales here, I'll probably get killed for this, but this gives you some idea of what our product can help you with CRA requirements. So in the protection of the confidentiality of stored transmitted data, then All these functions that you get in our SaaS platform, provisioning, generation of unique identity, and all this certification, like the CA certificate authority, is part of the core thing. So you don't have to go out to any third parties and buy certificates. We manage all that for you. Secure by design, so we can help you with secure boot of your product, advise you with that, and provide you with embedded software to implement it on both microcontrollers and Linux-based microprocessors. Ensure protection from unauthorized access. So again, passwordless authentication, and then all the vulnerabilities can be addressed through over-the-air updates, etc. And we can provide that capability as well. So if you're interested in how we can help you achieve some of your CRA compliance, not all of it, of course, like the SBOM, that's kind of down to you and a lot of documentation, but we can help you implement certainly the vulnerability resolution, over-the-air updates, initial provisioning, secure provisioning, and implementing a secure root of trust in the device. Then yeah, come and have a chat with us. We're at 8-7, right by the entrance here. We can give you a demo as well. We're very purpley, so you shouldn't be able to miss us. And that's all I have. How am I doing for time? Oh, not bad.
Very, very good. Now, does anyone have any questions for Chris? Hands up if anyone has any questions which you would like to put. Otherwise, you're very welcome to catch him on his stand, as he was saying. Do also remember, right at the front, how do I miss you?
Hi, good presentation. Quick question for you with regards to product compliance. So this is going into effect in January 2025. So is that applied to designs that go onto market from that point onwards, or will it be retroactive for designs that are currently out in the market?
It will be on designs that are currently ongoing if that product's going to be put on the market at 27.
Okay.
So yes, you will do that.
Useful to know. Anyone else got any queries, questions? Right. As I mentioned, this is the QR code that you get your CPD credit. So remember to just photograph that, and it will take you to the website to get your credit. But let us say thank you so much, Chris, and let's put on